Welp, this video is long overdue. Hey everyone, S-Dub Nation here, and welcome back to a brand new Marvel video here in the channel. I like to stop and take the time to rank all of the X-Men Trilogies ranked from the worst to the best. Please note that everything that I will say in this video is just my very own opinion. My list is certainly not the right list, it is just my list, and you are free to comment down below. Also, please note that this is going to be a franchise showdown, so it's going to have 6 rounds consisting of critics, first movie, second movie, third movie, audiences, and the consistency of all of the trilogies. So please like, comment, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into this video. And also, if you're seeing this on Halloween, happy Halloween, I guess. 2 more videos will be uploaded today, so look out for those. Like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into our ranking. And kicking off our first round, we're going to be looking at the critic score of each trilogy averaged out from Rotten Tomatoes. Coming in last place for me has got to go to the Wolverine trilogy with only 67%. Then our runner-up, we have the First Class or Beginnings trilogy with a 72.3%. But coming in first place has got to go to the original X-Men trilogy with a 74.3%. Our scoreboard now reads the originals in first place, the Beginnings in second place, and the Wolverine trilogy in third place. Our second round, we're going to be looking at each first movie inside of the trilogies, and we're going to rank them. Kicking off my list at number 3 has got to go to X-Men Origins Wolverine. This movie just does a bad job with keeping the continuity of the X-Men movies together and also giving us a great origin for Wolverine. I mean, X-Men Origins just throws Wolverine's origin out of the window. Sabretooth established, out of the window. The entire X-Men continuity, out of the window. It just becomes this campy blend of bad CGI, weird acting, and overall just a bad plot that doesn't really fit inside of the entire X-Men universe. And also, they destroyed Deadpool. My runner-up at number 2 has got to go to the original X-Men. This film and Blade and also Spider-Man 2002 paved the way for comic book films going forward, and I think that this movie does a great job with the world building. I love the way that we see how mutants are treated inside of this world, how mutants are feared inside of this world, and we get to see how the humans react to this, also how the mutants react to this. But honestly, the main problem here is the fact that we have a central story where Magneto wants to kidnap Rogue to turn politicians into mutants. Doesn't really kind of click inside of this film, but I do think that because of the world building, because of the great cast, because of the vibrant characters that we are introduced to, I really like this movie. But coming in at my number 1 has got to go to X-Men First Class. I love seeing the original X-Men, and I love seeing the origins of these icons. I just wish that we would have got more of the First Class themselves, but this film is a movie that shouldn't have been as great as it was, mainly because they deepened down into the characters of Charles Xavier and Eric Lensher, and I think that that was so perfect for this trilogy that if they wanted to reboot the franchise, they could have with this film. But I think that it was great that they just added its own little trilogy inside of this, making it more focused on the past and more focused on the relationship between Magneto and Professor X before they became those icons. And I think this right here, starting them off as friends and then seeing their 2 ideologies smashed together and just go their own separate ways at the end of this film to lead right into Days of Future Past, I think that that was the best thing for this film. So I think that X-Men First Class is a great film with an amazing story that shouldn't have been as great as it was. The scoreboard now reads Beginnings trilogy in first place with 3 points, the original trilogy in second place with 3 points, and the Wolverine trilogy in last place with 6 points. Our third round, we're going to be looking at the second movie inside of each trilogy. Kicking off my list at number 3 has got to go to the Wolverine. I think the first 2 acts of the Wolverine were very good. It has this Western style samurai feel to it, and I think that that was the best thing for Wolverine going forward. After that mess that we got of X-Men Origins, I think that this was a nice palate cleanser to get back to the serious roots of Wolverine and showing that Japanese samurai aspect about Wolverine that I didn't know that I actually wanted. I love seeing Wolverine just claw people down with samurai swords or just fight with a samurai sword. It's just something fun about seeing that. And then you get to the third act, which is not at all that very good because of the fact that we have these two realistic, grounded in reality, first two acts with him wanting to die. It being a Western, old style samurai movie, and then we get into sci-fi action with a CGI silver samurai that cuts his claws off and then sucks the adamantium out of his claws. Very weird stuff to put inside of the third act of a grounded movie so far. And honestly, I don't find this movie that rewatchable. If I'm going to watch a Wolverine movie, I will probably put on X-Men Origins Wolverine, not the Wolverine, because this one feels like it's more on the forgettable side of the X-Men movies. My runner-up at number 2 has got to go to X2 X-Men United. This is a sequel done right. It's the same as the first movie, but bigger and better. The sequel adds great effects and expands the characters, especially Wolverine, and partakes in the grander story. I honestly love the fact that we have all of these different stories going on, but they all flow together in continuity and coherently. I love the way that we have the X-Men on the run, or we have Magneto in prison, or we have the Stryker plot line, or we add in some new characters with new interesting ideas that will help the franchise, like adding in Nightcrawler, or adding in more character development for Magneto and Professor X's relationship. I think that stuff right there works for this sequel, that you can go bigger and better and add in more plot lines, but make it feel like it's inside of one concise story. But coming into my number 1 has got to go to X-Men Days of Future Past. Bryan Singer returns with a banger and brings back what was great about the original X-Men trilogy and the original X-Men movies, and that it felt like it was so comic booky, and this film is no different. This film feels like a comic book come to life, mainly because we have the new cast and the old cast coming in together and just creating a whole lot of fun. And we also have the time jump, which I think that is great because we get to see the characters where they ended off in First Class, and then we get to see how they're dealing with that loss of First Class in Days of Future Past. And I think that is a very great storyline to tell. We also have amazing plot lines dealing with the new Professor X, James McAvoy's Professor X, and then we also have a storyline going on with the original X-Men from the original trilogies that it is pretty dark. It keeps the storyline of the Beginnings trilogy flowing, but also returning back to the original trilogy storyline and capping that off with a nice little bow. And I think that this is probably one of the most rewatchable X-Men films on this list. The scoreboard now reads Beginnings in first place with 4 points, the originals in second place with 5 points, and the Wolverine trilogy in last place with 9 points. Our fourth round, we're going to be looking at the third movie in each trilogy. Kicking off my list at number 3, we have X-Men The Last Stand. I kind of like this movie. Up to this point, we've had 2 great X-Men movies, even though I wasn't around those times. And then obviously people were anticipating a third film and anticipating that the third film was going to be quite as good as the first 2. X-Men The Last Stand is not that film. X-Men The Last Stand is not that good. We have a unique storyline with the mutant cure, and that falls along the same lines with the Magneto storyline, which makes it work. But then we bring in the Dark Phoenix storyline, and it just does not work when you have those 3 plot lines. I mean, easily other comic book movies have other plot lines thrown out there, like 4 or 5. But this one, I think it only has at least about like 3, and 2 of them work together concisely. But then we add in a Dark Phoenix storyline, which is not at all that great of a storyline inside of this movie because, number 1, we begin central to that storyline, and then we veer away from it. We kill off Professor X, we kill off Cyclops, and just brush them off aside like they're not really main characters of this trilogy. And then we move into the mutant cure and the Magneto storyline, which works inside of this trilogy. And then at the end, when that's all done, we return right back to the Dark Phoenix storyline. So it just does not work, and all of the pieces just fall apart. My runner-up at number 2 has got to go to X-Men Apocalypse. It is not that bad. Like, this movie, I like this movie. It is not that bad. It's very enjoyable. Trust me on this. Like, this movie, a lot of people give it a bad rap because of the villain, which the villain is bad because he literally just touches the TV, says learning, and that's how he learned things. But I do love that Magneto plotline with his family. That is the best stuff inside of any X-Men movie, maybe even in any comic book film. I think that Magneto plotline just worked so well and so in line with his character. And then he becomes one of the four horsemen of apocalypse and he just flies up with trash flowing around him. Not the best execution of Magneto inside of a big scale movie like this where you have the literal villain Apocalypse. But the entire movie I find enjoyable. Nothing really too bad about it, except for that villain stuff and the four horsemen stuff like that. And also it does have a little bit of pacing issues, a little bit of story issues, and they think that we already know these characters, Jean Grey and Cyclops, so we really don't need to expand more on their characters. But this is a new cast with new actors, so you kind of have to do that when you're trying to bring in the old characters and try to have it aligned with the original trilogy. But I think all in all, this film right here is pretty good, and it is not as bad as people say it is. Easily the weakest of the Bryan Singer X-Men, though. I mean, why is Mystique all of a sudden the leader of the X-Men now? That don't make no sense. But coming in at my number one has got to go to Logan. Logan is the best X-Men movie for me. And also, it is a big step up in quality from the last two films on this ranking for the third movies. And I think that Logan, it works. I'm glad that Fox had the balls to actually do this movie, because this is essentially just a movie about death. We literally watch Logan die inside of this film. We see him slowly dying inside of the rest of the film. And I just think that works so perfectly and concludes his character along with Professor X's character as well, because we have that 17-year background knowledge on these two characters, what their ideologies are, and even seeing a younger Professor X and seeing where he started out from and to where he led to inside of this film. It is a hard watch though. It's not a movie that you can just easily put in at any time and say, you know what, today I'll watch Logan. You know what, matter of fact, tomorrow I'll watch Logan. It is not that type of film. This is a film that you have to be in the mood to watch, or if you just happen to watch it one day, you are immersed inside of the story because it is finally concluding that Wolverine storyline. The film feels more along the lines of a Western because it deals with the themes of death, regret, and redemption. This is a movie that you have to check out for yourself because it's essentially the best X-Men movie and probably top 5 Marvel movies of all time for me. The scoreboard still reads The Beginnings in first place with 6 points, Originals in second place with 8 points, and the Wolverine Trilogy in the last place with 10 points. Our fifth round, we're going to be looking at the consistency of each trilogy. Kicking off my list at number 3 has got to go to the Wolverine trilogy. This trilogy starts off with the worst X-Men movie, but also ends with the best X-Men movie. And it is not a coherent story. I mean, you could argue that this is Wolverine's story, you know, his origin, and then we see him getting foreshadows of his death, but also being a little bit of a samurai in the mix. And then you also have him inside of Logan where he finally dies. And I don't see that. I honestly don't see this being a coherent story because of the fact that we have this campy style superhero movie with bad CGI that did not do justice to his origin and to the X-Men continuity. And then we move inside of the Wolverine, a good film, yet forgettable, but also very Western style feel. You can feel that Western inside of there. You can feel that Western genre trying to seep its way into the Wolverine trilogy. And then we move into Logan, which is a full-on Western, R-rated, but it feels like the Wolverine and Logan were two movies directed by the same person. You can feel that these are two movies that flow together well because the story of the Wolverine lends itself well to Logan. But I do think that this trilogy right here is the worst consistent inside of all of the X-Men trilogies. My runner-up at number 2 has got to go to the Beginnings trilogy. Now, the Beginnings trilogy started off really good, and then it got better and better. And then we got into X-Men Apocalypse, which is an enjoyable film for me. I really like X-Men Apocalypse, but I can see that it does not work at all. I mean, it worked so well in First Class, where we have this relationship between Professor X and Magneto. Before they were these icons, they were friends, and we get to see them train together, train the original X-Men, go on missions, and go recruiting new mutants and stuff like that. And I found that pretty well. And then when the betrayal happens in the end, when we see these two characters go their separate ways, you can feel that emotion inside of it, which leads us well into Days of Future Past, where that story is still continued, which mends the continuity between the beginning trilogy and the original trilogy, and also X-Men Origins and the Wolverine perfectly. And then we move into X-Men Apocalypse, which doesn't really do justice to Mystique's character or Magneto's character. Why is Mystique all of a sudden wanting to be the leader of the X-Men when the past two films showed that she wanted nothing to do with the X-Men? She wanted to fight for her cause, which would have led perfectly well into the original trilogy, which they had set up inside of First Class and Days of Future Past. We also have Magneto fighting for the same exact cause, but go about it a different way than Mystique. But also we have that family arc inside of it, which makes his arc inside of Apocalypse start, but also follows what happened in Days of Future Past and First Class. But then we have Mystique joining the X-Men and becoming the leader of the X-Men. And then we have Magneto being one of the four horsemen of Apocalypse, which is a very cool idea. But then what they do with him is that he just floats around trash and nothing really happens. And then at the end, he has a change of heart, puts the X in front of Apocalypse, and then he helps fight Apocalypse in the end. My whole main thing about this is the fact that Magneto and Mystique's characters change drastically when going inside of Apocalypse and doesn't really acknowledge what happened in the first two films. Except this trilogy is kind of consistent. But coming in at my number one has got to go to the original X-Men trilogy. This is the X-Men story complete. At the end of this trilogy, we have X-Men The Last Stand, which is not a good movie, and it doesn't do a great job at concluding this overall story, but it does a good enough job at concluding this overall story, mainly because we have plot lines set up in the first movie that get paid off inside of X-Men The Last Stand. No matter how bad do you think the movie is, you gotta acknowledge that this right here, from the first X-Men to X-Men The Last Stand, it feels like a coherent story. Whether you have the Professor X and Magneto rivalry, that gets resolved inside of X-Men The Last Stand. Just like how we have Rogue being scared of her mutant powers, that gets resolved in X-Men The Last Stand. Then we also have the love triangle between Logan and Jean Grey and also Cyclops. We get an answer to that inside of X-Men The Last Stand. So regardless of how bad I think or you guys think that X-Men The Last Stand is, you gotta acknowledge that this movie closed off the original X-Men trilogy. Not great, but good enough, and I think that that works perfectly fine. This entire original trilogy did kind of end off with a sour note, but don't get me wrong, inside of this trilogy it tells individual stories but also has a consistent plot going through. So I think that the original X-Men trilogy has to come in at number one for consistency. The scoreboard now reads: The Beginnings still in first place with 8 points, Originals in second place with 9 points, and the Wolverine trilogy in last place with 13 points. And finally, we're going to be looking at the audience's score of each respective trilogy. So coming in last place for me has got to go to the Wolverine trilogy with a 72.3% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 4 of you guys voted, so it's 76.3%. Then we have the X-Men trilogy, the original, with only a 76.3%. 1 person voted, so we have a 77.3%. Then we have the First Class Beginnings trilogy with the 81%. 4 of you guys voted, so that leaves us with an 85%. So the new scoreboard reads: Beginnings still in first place with 9 points, Originals in second place with 11 points, and the Wolverine trilogy in last place with 16 points, thus ending our franchise showdown. Alright guys, that was it for the ranking. Please note that everything that I did say in this video was just my very own opinion. My list was certainly not the right list, it was just my list, and you're free to comment down below your ranking of all the X-Men trilogies ranked from the worst to the best, just like me, or you could just do your favorite. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace. Also, happy Halloween, everybody.